"I already know what she has," the nanny told the millionaire about his daughter who had been sick since birth. The dense winter afternoon fog enveloped Ashtonbury like a grey cloak, hiding the centuries-old pine trees that guarded the Sterling family mansion. Camilla Hayes nervously adjusted the strap of her worn purse as she ascended the stone steps of the main entrance. Her hands trembled slightly, not just from the biting cold that swept down from the hills, but from the anxiety that gripped her chest. It was her fourth interview that June, and the money from her last severance package was dwindling faster than she had imagined. The advertisement had appeared on a closed medical portal, one that only professionals in the field could access. It sought a nurse with pediatric training, proven experience with newborns, and what caught her attention most, absolute discretion. The remuneration was too generous to be true, almost triple what she had earned at the public hospital, where she worked for 3 years. The Sterling surname carried weight in the south of the country, a legacy of power and influence that spanned generations. Owen Sterling owned a chain of petrol stations that stretched from the Scottish lowlands to the English Midlands. His name appeared in social columns, charity events, and even political news. He was the kind of man who shaped the town around him, who decided the future of many families with a simple phone call. Camilla knew his reputation, as did everyone in Ashtonbury. But what intrigued her was the almost secretive tone of the advertisement, as if the vacancy was a secret that needed to be kept under lock and key. The heavy, solid wood door opened, revealing a middle-aged woman dressed in an impeccable all-black uniform with white details on the collar. Her face was serious, marked by wrinkles that seemed etched by severity. She didn't smile when greeting Camilla, merely gave a dry nod of her head indicating her to enter. The entrance hall was spacious, decorated with minimalist artworks that Camilla couldn't fully comprehend. Everything there exuded money, but also a coldness that made her swallow hard. Mrs. Nair, as the woman introduced herself in a deep, controlled voice, led Camilla through wide corridors with marble flooring that echoed every step. The walls were covered in neutral tones, beige and grey, without a single family photograph in sight. It was as if the house was more a museum than a home. Camilla tried to strike up a conversation, commenting on the cold or the beauty of the architecture, but received only monosyllabic responses, polite but distant. At the end of the corridor, Mrs. Nair stopped before a frosted glass door and knocked 3 times, with precise intervals. A feminine voice, soft but firm, authorized entry. The room was an elegant office with shelves full of legal and business books. Behind a rosewood desk sat Lorena Alcott. Camilla recognized her immediately, from photos she had seen in local newspapers. She was Owen Sterling's new fiancée, a woman of about 35, with delicate features but a penetrating gaze that seemed to see through any attempt at dissimulation. Lorena wore a navy blue tailored suit that accentuated her upright, confident posture. Her brown hair was pulled back in an impeccable bun, and her thin lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She gestured for Camilla to sit in the chair opposite the desk, while Mrs. Nair silently withdrew, closing the door behind her. The silence that followed was dense, almost palpable. Lorena leafed through Camilla's resume with slow, calculated movements, as if each line was a test the candidate needed to pass. The interview began objectively. Lorena questioned Camilla about her academic background, her previous experiences, and the reasons that led her to leave the public hospital. Camilla answered truthfully, mentioning the emotional toll of dealing with the precariousness of the healthcare system, her desire to work in a more controlled environment, and the need for remuneration that would allow her to help her mother, who lived alone in Willow Creek. Lorena listened attentively, making a few observations in a brown leather notebook she kept by her side. Then came the more specific questions. Lorena wanted to know if Camilla had experience with babies presenting complex medical conditions, if she knew how to handle emergency situations, if she had any ties to the press or active social media. This last question sounded strange, but Camilla merely shook her head, explaining that she preferred to keep her private life off the internet. Lorena seemed satisfied with the answer, and her tone of voice softened slightly as she explained the context of the job. Baby Clara, Owen Sterling's daughter, had been born 6 months ago and had been under continuous medical care ever since. Lorena did not go into detail about the child's condition, only mentioning that medicine had not yet clearly defined the diagnosis. It was a delicate matter, requiring constant monitoring, strict routines, and, above all, absolute secrecy. The local press was eager for any information about the Sterlings' personal lives, and any leak could bring serious consequences for both the family and whoever was responsible. Camilla felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something about that conversation that didn't quite fit. Why so much secrecy surrounding a child's medical condition? Why the need for extreme confidentiality? But she needed that job. Bills were overdue, her mother depended on expensive medication for high blood pressure, and opportunities in Ashtonbury were not abundant, especially for someone who had been dismissed after reporting irregularities in the hospital's drug inventory. Lorena slid a thick contract across the table, accompanied by a gold pen. She explained that the salary would be deposited into her current account on the first business day of each month, that Camilla would have an annex studio apartment in the mansion to live in during the week, and that her weekends would be free, provided there was a reliable substitute. The contract was for an indefinite period, but included a confidentiality clause that prohibited any comments about the house's routine, Clara's health, or the family's habits. The penalty for non-compliance was absurdly high, equivalent to 5 years' salary. Camilla read each line carefully, feeling the weight of that decision. It was a lot of money, it was stability, it was a chance to rebuild her life. But it was also an invisible cage, a commitment that would tie her to secrets she didn't even know yet. She took a deep breath, thought of her mother, the bills, the lack of options, and signed. Lorena smiled for the first time genuinely, as if she had just closed a profitable deal. She shook Camilla's hand firmly and said she would start the following Monday at 7 in the morning. The next 3 days were a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Camilla packed her few clothes in an old suitcase, said goodbye to her mother with a tight hug, and promised to visit her every Sunday. Her mother, Mrs. Helen, looked at her daughter with that mixture of pride and worry that only mothers know how to express. She held Camilla's face in her hands and said, her voice choked, to be careful not to trust appearances too much, to remember that people with a lot of money sometimes forgot that on the other side were human beings with feelings. On Monday, Camilla arrived at the Sterling mansion even before the sun had fully risen. The fog still covered the perfectly manicured gardens, and the sound of birds was muffled by the damp air. Mrs. Nair received her at the back door, the entrance reserved for staff, and led her to the studio apartment that would be her dwelling. It was a small but comfortable space, with a single bed, a built-in wardrobe, a small table with 2 chairs, and a tiny bathroom. The window overlooked the back of the property, where the service area and the caretaker's house were located. After organizing her belongings, Camilla was taken to the nursery. It was a spacious room on the 2nd floor of the mansion, decorated in pastel shades of pink and white. The walls had delicate wallpaper designs of bunnies and flowers. There was a noble wooden crib in the center, a nursing armchair beside it, a changing table dresser, and, in the corner, a small locked refrigerator. Mrs. Nair explained that Clara's bottles came pre-prepared by a specialized laboratory following specific medical instructions. Camilla should never alter the portions, times, or components. Clara was sleeping when Camilla first saw her. She was a small baby for 6 months, with still rounded cheeks but slightly pale skin. Her hair was fine and light brown, and her tiny hands were closed in delicate fists. Camilla felt a wave of tenderness looking at that fragile creature. There was something in Clara's expression, even in sleep, that conveyed a deep vulnerability, as if she carried an invisible weight since she came into the world. The routine was explained with military precision. Clara was to wake at 7 in the morning, have a warm bath, receive a nappy change with specific products organized in numbered drawers. At 8, the first bottle. At 10, a nap of no more than an hour. At noon, the second bottle. In the afternoon, light play with age-appropriate educational toys. At 1600 hours, the third bottle. At 1800 hours, the evening bath. At 1930, the last bottle before bed. During the night, Clara might wake once or twice, and Camilla was to soothe her without turning on bright lights, only with the amber nightlight beside the crib. Everything seemed perfectly planned, a mechanism that worked flawlessly. But Camilla, trained to observe subtle signs in pediatric patients, began to notice small inconsistencies already in the first few days. Clara did not interact with toys in the same way other 6-month-old babies usually did. She didn't follow objects with her gaze for long, didn't show social smiles when someone approached, didn't emit the typical babbling for her age. Her cry was weak, almost a low lament, and at times her eyes seemed glazed over as if she were looking at a distant point no one else could see. Furthermore, Clara had frequent episodes of low-grade fever, ranging between 37 and 38 degrees Celsius. The girl's skin, when examined closely, showed irregular, small, pinkish spots that appeared and disappeared for no apparent reason. During feeding, Clara often made grimaces of discomfort, as if swallowing was a painful task. Camilla tried more than once to raise these issues with Lorena, but always received evasive answers. Lorena said that the doctors were already aware that these were characteristics of the still undiagnosed condition, and that Camilla should simply follow the established routine without questioning. Owen Sterling was an almost ghostly presence in the mansion. Camilla saw him only twice in the first week, always in passing, dressed in impeccable suits and with his phone glued to his ear. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with grey hair combed back and blue eyes that seemed to carry a deep weariness. On the rare occasions he entered the nursery, he looked at Clara with an expression difficult to decipher, something between affection and heavy sadness. He lightly touched his daughter's head, whispered something inaudible, and left quickly as if remaining there was too painful. Lorena, on the other hand, was always present. She supervised everything, from the bathwater temperature to how Camilla folded the cloth nappies used during the day. Her control was absolute, but disguised under a layer of cold politeness. She smiled when giving orders, thanked when demanding obedience, praised when pointing out errors. Camilla felt constantly watched, as if her every move was being analyzed and judged. The security cameras scattered throughout the house were another constant reminder that nothing there was private. In the second week, Camilla began to pay more attention to the bottles. They came labeled with dates and times, stored in the locked refrigerator in the nursery. The key remained with Lorena, who handed it to Camilla only at feeding times and retrieved it immediately afterward. Camilla noticed that the formulas were never exactly the same. Some were thicker, others more liquid. Some had a slightly yellowish tint, others were almost white. When questioned, Lorena explained that these were nutritional adjustments made according to Clara's response to the treatment. But what treatment? Camilla never saw a doctor visit the house. She never saw prescriptions or consultation reports. There was no medical chart or formal record of Clara's health status in the nursery, only superficial handwritten notes by Lorena in a notebook she kept locked in a desk drawer in her office. That deeply disturbed Camilla. As a healthcare professional, she knew that any child with a complex medical condition should have rigorous monitoring, with periodic examinations, specialized consultations, and detailed records. One night, Camilla woke to a faint noise coming from the nursery. It was almost 3 in the morning. She quickly got up, still drowsy, and walked down the dark corridor to Clara's room. Upon opening the door, she found everything seemingly in order. Clara slept peacefully. The nightlight softly illuminated the room. The digital thermometer beside the crib showed a stable temperature, but Camilla had the strange feeling that someone had been there moments before. The air felt different, as if a presence had just dissipated. She approached the crib and watched Clara sleep. The baby's breathing was regular, but her tiny eyes moved rapidly under closed lids, as if she were having an intense dream. Camilla lightly placed her hand on Clara's forehead and felt a slightly elevated temperature. She took the digital thermometer and confirmed 37.8. Low fever again. She made mental notes, deciding that the next day she would speak more firmly with Lorena about the need for an in-person medical evaluation. But when she tried to approach the subject in the morning, Lorena cut off the conversation before Camilla even finished expressing her concerns. She said, with a cold smile and a voice too firm to be ignored, that Camilla was there to follow instructions, not to question them. The doctors responsible for Clara were renowned specialists, with clinics in Edinburgh and London, and came to the mansion when necessary. At times that did not coincide with Camilla's working hours. If she didn't feel comfortable with the work dynamic, Lorena could easily find another professional willing to take that position. Camilla swallowed her objections, but felt a tightening in her chest. There was something profoundly wrong with the situation, and the longer she stayed there, the more evident it became. She began to observe not only Clara but the entire dynamic of the house. The staff were few and extremely discreet. Besides Mrs. Nair and Elias, the gardener, there was a cook who prepared the family's meals but was rarely seen, and a driver who lived in the garage and only appeared when Owen needed to go. Hout? Elias was a man of about 50, thin with calloused hands and a sad gaze that seemed to carry untold stories. He had worked in the mansion's gardens for over 10 years, since before Owen's first marriage. Camilla exchanged polite greetings with him when they crossed paths in the corridors, or when she took Clara out for some sun in the garden on milder mornings. Elias was a man of few words, but always kind, always respectful. One day, as Camilla adjusted Clara in her pram for a morning stroll through the garden, Elias approached with pruning shears in his hands. He was trimming the rose bushes that lined the stone path. Camilla commented on the beauty of the flowers, and Elias thanked her with a shy nod of his head. Then, without looking directly at her, he said something that made Camilla freeze. He said that house had seen a lot, that the walls held secrets no one should know, that not everything was as it seemed. Camilla stopped pushing the pram and looked at Elias, waiting for him to continue, but he just shook his head, as if regretting having said too much, and returned to work. Camilla stood there still, watching the gardeners bent back, feeling she had just received a veiled warning. She looked at Clara, who slept peacefully under the soft morning sun, and wondered what kind of situation she had gotten herself into. In the days that followed, Camilla began to pay attention to every detail. She noticed that Lorena spent hours locked in the office, always with the phone in her hand, always with that brown notebook by her side. She noticed that Owen, when at home, avoided staying long in the nursery as if his daughter's presence caused him a suffering he couldn't face. She noticed that Mrs. Nair, despite her apparent rigidity, sometimes looked at Clara with an expression of deep pity, as if she knew something terrible she couldn't reveal. And she noticed, above all, that Clara was not improving. On the contrary, the fever episodes became more frequent, the skin spots more evident, the apathy more pronounced. Camilla, with her pediatric experience, recognized the signs that something was being neglected, that this child needed a complete and urgent medical investigation. But how to insist on it without losing her job? How to report a situation she didn't yet fully understand? It was then that Camilla decided she needed to act, but intelligently and cautiously. She began to make discreet records in a small notebook she kept hidden under her mattress. She noted the times of fevers, the characteristics of the spots, Clara's reactions during feeding, the moments of apathy. She mentally photographed every detail, building an invisible dossier that could, one day, serve as proof that something was not right. Meanwhile, life in the Sterling mansion followed its meticulous and cold routine. Meals were served at exact times, lights were turned off at the same minute every night, gardens were pruned with geometric precision. Everything there exuded control, order, perfection, but beneath that impeccable surface, Camilla felt there was a silent rot, a secret that was corroding the foundations of that family from within. And she was determined to uncover that secret, even if it meant risking everything she had achieved. Because every time she looked at Clara, at those fragile, lost little eyes, Camilla felt that something bigger was at stake than just a job or a salary. There was a life that depended on someone brave enough to see beyond appearances, to question what everyone accepted as truth. That night, as Clara slept and the mansion plunged into the icy silence of dawn, Camilla stayed awake in her studio apartment, looking out the window at Ashtonbury's starry sky. She knew she had crossed an invisible line, that she had entered a game whose rules she didn't yet fully know. But she also knew there was no turning back. Whatever was happening in that house, she would find out. And when she did, she would do whatever was necessary to protect that defenseless child. Because Camilla Hayes was not just a nurse seeking financial stability. She was above all a woman who believed that every life deserved to be defended, that every truth deserved to be revealed, that every injustice deserved to be fought. And in that cold, silent mansion, amidst fog and secrets, she had found a cause worth fighting for. Dawn arrived slowly, painting the sky in pink and golden hues. Camilla got up, put on her white uniform, tied her hair back, and prepared for another day. But now, every gesture was charged with a greater purpose. Every glance at Clara was a renewed commitment. Every breath was a silent promise that no matter the cost, the truth would come to light. And as she walked through the corridors of the Sterling mansion that morning, Camilla felt she was about to discover something that would change not only her life, but the destiny of that entire family. Camilla's third week at the Sterling mansion began with a subtle but noticeable change. Lorena started observing her with even more attention, as if she had detected something different in the nurse's behavior. The glances were longer, the questions more direct, the presence more constant. Camilla felt she needed to be even more cautious, that any slip could cost her stay there and, consequently, her ability to help Clara. That Saturday morning, while preparing Clara for her bath, Camilla noticed something that alarmed her. The baby was experiencing slight tremors in her upper limbs, involuntary movements that were not caused by cold as the nursery temperature was rigorously controlled. Clara also seemed more apathetic than usual, her eyes half closed and her breathing slightly irregular. Camilla checked her temperature and found it to be 38 degrees Celsius, the highest since she had started working there. She knew she should inform Lorena immediately, but something made her hesitate. Instead, Camilla decided to observe Clara more closely throughout the day, mentally recording every symptom, every reaction, every detail that could be relevant. She noticed that the tremors intensified after the bottles, especially the morning one. She also noticed that Clara, instead of crying or showing obvious discomfort, simply withdrew, as if she were disconnecting from the world around her. At noon, when Lorena entered the nursery for her daily inspection, Camilla mentioned the fever and tremors. Lorena approached the crib, touched Clara's forehead with the back of her hand, and said, with a tranquility that sounded false to Camilla's ears, that it was just a common fever spike in babies, nothing that required excessive concern. She instructed Camilla to administer the antipyretic kept in one of the numbered drawers and to continue with the normal routine. Camilla obeyed, but her professional instinct screamed that this was not normal. 6-month-old babies did not present involuntary tremors after feeding. Babies with recurrent fever spikes needed a complete medical investigation. The entire situation was wrong, and the longer it went on, the more Camilla felt trapped in a web of secrets she still couldn't fully untangle. In the afternoon, while Clara napped, Camilla took advantage of a moment when Lorena had left for a meeting outside the mansion and decided to explore the house a little more. She knew she was risking everything, but the need to understand what was happening was stronger than the fear of consequences. She walked through the corridors of the second floor, observing the old portraits that adorned the walls. They were black and white photographs of past generations of the Sterling family, serious faces and rigid postures that seemed to judge anyone who dared to look at them. At the end of the corridor there was a slightly ajar door that Camilla had never noticed before. She discreetly peeked inside and saw that it was a spacious room, clearly unoccupied for some time. The bed was covered with a white sheet. The furniture had a light layer of dust, and the curtains were closed, creating a melancholy dimness. Camilla entered silently, feeling her heart quicken. There was something in that room that seemed frozen in time, as if life had stopped there at some point in the past. On the dresser, she found a framed photograph that made her stop breathing for an instant. It was the image of a young, beautiful woman holding a newborn baby in her arms. The woman had long, dark hair, almond-shaped eyes, and a soft smile that contrasted with the sadness that seemed to inhabit her gaze. Camilla didn't need long to conclude who that woman was. It was Anna Lucy, Owen Sterling's first wife, Clara's biological mother. Camilla knew through discreet comments she had heard among the staff that Anna Lucy had passed away under vague circumstances a few months after Clara's birth. The official version was that she had suffered a sudden illness during a trip to London, something related to her heart. But no one talked much about the subject, as if that death was a forbidden topic within the mansion. Even Mrs. Nair, when Camilla tried to ask something about the late Mrs. Sterling, had averted her gaze and quickly changed the subject. Camilla carefully picked up the photograph, observing every detail. Anna Lucy looked exhausted in the photo, as if carrying that baby in her arms was more than just a physical burden. Her eyes had a strange sparkle, a mixture of love and desperation that Camilla recognized from her experiences at the hospital. It was the look of mothers who knew something was not right with their children, but who still fought to believe that everything would be okay. A noise in the corridor startled Camilla. She put the photograph back in its place, quickly left the room, and carefully closed the door. Her heart pounded as she walked back to the nursery, feigning naturalness in case she met anyone along the way. Fortunately, the corridors were empty, and she managed to return unseen. Clara still slept peacefully, oblivious to the whirlwind of questions that now flooded Camilla's mind. Who was Anna Lucy, really? What happened to her? Why was her death treated as a shameful secret? And more importantly, what was Clara's true condition? Camilla felt that all these questions were connected in some way, that there was an invisible thread linking the past to the present, the dead mother to the sick daughter, the family's secrets to the current situation. That night, after putting Clara to sleep, Camilla locked herself in her studio apartment and decided she needed outside help. She picked up her phone and dialed the number of Robert, an old college friend from nursing school who now worked in a pediatric neurology clinic in Edinburgh. Robert was a brilliant professional, dedicated and, above all, discreet. If there was anyone Camilla could trust, it was him. Robert answered on the third ring, his sleepy voice indicating he was already in bed. Camilla apologized for the late hour but said it was urgent. She described Clara's symptoms in as much detail as possible: the tremors, the recurrent fevers, the apathy, the skin spots, the difficulty feeding, the disconnected gaze. Robert listened carefully, asking some technical questions about the frequency and intensity of the symptoms. After a few minutes of reflection, Robert suggested that it could be something within the spectrum of rare childhood neurological syndromes. He mentioned West syndrome, a severe form of epilepsy that manifests in babies, characterized by infantile spasms, developmental delay, and abnormal electroencephalograms. He explained that if diagnosed early, the condition was treatable, but that neglect could lead to permanent sequelae in the child's cognitive and motor development. Camilla felt a lump in her throat. Everything made sense now. The tremors were epileptic spasms. The apathy was a consequence of neurological impairment. The recurrent fevers could be related to complications of the condition or inadequate medication. But why wasn't the family seeking adequate treatment? Why all the secrecy? Why wasn't Clara being monitored by specialists transparently? Robert recommended that Camilla try to convince the family to take Clara for a complete neurological evaluation, including an electroencephalogram and a brain MRI. He even offered to mediate with trusted specialists, ensuring absolute discretion. But Camilla knew it wouldn't be that simple. There was something more at stake here, something beyond Clara's health. There was a reason for all that control, for all that secrecy, and she was determined to find out what it was. On Sunday, Camilla's day off, she visited her mother in Willow Creek. Mrs. Helen prepared a delicious lunch with roasted chicken, carretero rice, and beetroot salad. While they ate, Camilla vaguely told her mother, without revealing names, about the situation she was experiencing. Mrs. Helen, with the wisdom of someone who had lived much and seen everything, said something that echoed in Camilla's mind for the rest of the day. She said that rich people sometimes preferred to hide the truth rather than face shame, that for some families appearances were worth more than life itself. Camilla returned to the Sterling mansion in the late afternoon, feeling more determined than ever. She was not just an employee there, she was a healthcare professional with ethical obligations that went beyond any employment contract. Clara was a defenseless child who depended on her, and Camilla could not forgive herself if she simply closed her eyes to the situation. On Monday morning, Camilla decided to try a different approach. Instead of confronting Lorena directly, she sought to speak with Owen. It was rare to find him at home, But that day he was working in his office, reviewing documents and making calls. Camilla knocked gently on the door, and Owen authorized her entry with a distracted gesture. Owen's office was even more imposing than Lorena's. There were shelves filled with books on administration, economics, and law. The walls were decorated with certificates, business awards, and photographs of him alongside influential politicians and businessmen. Owen sat behind a gigantic mahogany desk, wearing reading glasses and with a tired expression that aged his features. Camilla began respectfully, mentioning that she would like to discuss some aspects of Clara's health. Owen took off his glasses and looked at her attentively for the first time since she had started working there. His blue eyes were penetrating, but also carried a deep sadness that he tried to hide beneath a mask of authority. He gestured for Camilla to sit and asked what was happening. Camilla chose her words carefully. She mentioned the tremors, the recurrent fevers, the need for a more in-depth neurological evaluation. She explained with the firmness of someone who knew what she was talking about that Clara might have a treatable condition, but that time was crucial to avoid permanent complications. Owen listened in silence, his face gradually closing, as if each of Camilla's words was a veiled accusation. When Camilla finished, Owen took a deep breath and said in a low voice but filled with suppressed emotion that he knew very well what Clara's condition was. He said that his daughter was under the care of the best specialists in the country, that all necessary examinations had already been done, that the treatment was being rigorously followed. He thanked Camilla for her concern, but made it clear that she should focus on following the instructions given to her, without questioning medical decisions that were beyond her competence. Camilla felt a mixture of frustration and pity. Owen was not a cruel man, she realized that. He was a suffering father, carrying an invisible weight that was consuming him from within. But he was also a man who had chosen silence, who had decided to hide the truth for reasons Camilla still didn't fully comprehend. She left the office feeling she had lost a battle but not the war. That afternoon, while Clara slept, Camilla decided to explore once again the areas of the mansion to which she had limited access. She went down to the ground floor and noticed that the door leading to the basement was ajar, which was unusual. The basement was a restricted area, mainly used to store old furniture, family documents, and maintenance equipment. Camilla looked around, making sure she was alone, and descended the wooden steps that creaked under her feet. The basement was damp and poorly lit, with only a few small windows letting in a faint grayish light. There were stacked boxes, furniture covered with sheets, and shelves full of dusty objects. Camilla walked carefully, observing every detail, looking for something that could give her a clue about the family's secrets. At the back of the basement, she found an old, slightly rusted, metal cabinet. The door was locked, but the lock was old and fragile. Camilla took a bobby pin from her pocket and, with the skill she had learned as a child playing detective with her siblings, managed to force the lock. The cabinet opened with a loud creak that made her heart pound. Inside there were folders organized by year, tax documents, old contracts, and at the back a cardboard box with the word Anna handwritten on the side. Camilla took the box with trembling hands and opened it. Inside she found medical exams, neurological consultation reports, and old prescriptions. The documents were all related to a patient whose name was partially erased, but the symptoms described were identical to Clara's. Frequent muscle spasms, sensory apathy, slowed cognitive development, recurrent nocturnal fever, irregular skin lesions. Everything was there, documented by renowned doctors, dated months ago, even before Anna Lucy's death. Camilla realized with a shock that made her stagger that these were not documents about Clara. They were documents about Anna Lucy. The mother had presented the same symptoms that the daughter was now presenting. That changed everything. If Anna Lucy had had a neurological condition that had never been adequately treated, and if Clara was presenting similar symptoms, this could indicate a hereditary genetic condition. But why was the family hiding it? Why weren't they seeking open and transparent treatment for Clara? What was so shameful about a neurological disease that justified all that secrecy? Camilla photographed some of the documents with her phone, taking care not to leave any trace that she had touched them. She put everything back in place, closed the cabinet, and quickly climbed the basement stairs. Her heart was pounding so hard that she could hear it echoing in her ears. She knew she had crossed a dangerous line, that if discovered she would be fired immediately, perhaps even sued for invasion of privacy. But she also knew she was closer to the truth than ever. That night, after Clara fell asleep, Camilla analyzed the photographs she had taken. She enlarged the images, read each report carefully, and tried to decipher the medical notes. One of the reports mentioned the possibility of a rare genetic syndrome with an autosomal dominant inheritance pattern. This meant that if one parent had the genetic mutation, there was a 50% chance of transmitting it to their children. If Ana Lucy had this condition, Clara had a high probability of having it too. But why wasn't Ana Lucy treated properly? Why did she die so young? And why now was Clara being kept in a kind of medical limbo without an official diagnosis, without transparent treatment, without adequate follow-up? Camilla sent the photographs to Robert, asking him to analyze them carefully and discreetly. The next morning, Robert called back, his voice tense and worried. He confirmed that the symptoms described were consistent with a rare form of epileptic encephalopathy with a genetic pattern. It was a serious condition, but there were treatment protocols that could significantly improve the patient's quality of life. The question was why this treatment was not being applied openly and adequately. Robert suggested that Camilla speak with a lawyer specializing in medical law, that it might be necessary to involve Child Protective Services or the Public Prosecutor's Office to ensure Clara's rights. But Camilla knew it wouldn't be that simple. Owen Sterling was a powerful man, with political connections and financial resources that could easily silence any complaint. She needed more solid evidence, a better structured plan, and allies who could support her in that fight. In the following days, Camilla paid even closer attention to the dynamic between Lorena and Owen. She noticed that the two rarely spoke genuinely, that there was an emotional distance between them that went beyond the simple stress of a couple about to get married. Lorena seemed to be always in control, always dictating the rules, always manipulating situations to her advantage. Owen, on the other hand, seemed increasingly absent, more tired, more defeated. Camilla also began to pay attention to small details that had previously gone unnoticed. She noticed that Lorena kept a locked notebook in her office, where she made daily notes about Clara. She noticed that the bottles prepared for the baby came from a specific laboratory, always with discrete labels and no clear identification of the components. She noticed that on days when Clara had more severe crises, Lorena seemed strangely satisfied, as if it were part of a larger plan. One day, while organizing toys in the nursery closet, Camilla found something that made her stop breathing. Hidden between the torn pages of a children's storybook, there was an old maternity bracelet. It was one of those that hospitals put on newborn babies, with the mother's name and date of birth. The bracelet had the name Clarissa Alcott Sterling, and a date that did not match Clara's birth certificate that Camilla had seen in the nursery's medical file. According to the certificate, Clara was born in December, but the bracelet indicated a date in November, almost a month earlier. That didn't make sense. Why would there be a discrepancy in dates? Why was the full name on the bracelet Clarissa and not just Clara? Camilla felt she had discovered another piece of that complex and disturbing puzzle. She put the bracelet in an envelope, hid it at the bottom of her suitcase, and decided she needed to investigate more about Ana Lucy. That night, after Clara fell asleep, Camilla used her laptop to search for news about the death of Owen Sterling's first wife. She found only brief notes in local newspapers mentioning that Ana Lucy Alcott Sterling had died under tragic circumstances during a trip to London a few months after her daughter's birth. There were no details about the cause of death, no mention of a public wake or ceremony, no family statements. It was as if Ana Lucy had simply disappeared from public life, as if her existence had been deliberately erased. Camilla felt a chill run down her spine. There was something profoundly wrong with that story, something that went far beyond a simple genetic disease. She decided she needed to talk to Elias again. The gardener was the oldest employee in the house. He had known the family even before Ana Lucy entered Owen's life. If there was anyone who could give her information about the past, it was him. Camilla waited for an opportunity, and it came a few days later when Elias was pruning the rose bushes near the service area. Camilla approached cautiously, pretending to simply enjoy the fresh morning air. She started the conversation casually, commenting on the weather, the gardens, the beauty of the mansion. Elias responded with monosyllables, but Camilla perceived that he was willing to listen. Then, in a low voice and looking around to make sure they were alone, she asked about Anna Lucy. Elias stopped pruning, gripped the shears tightly, and looked at the ground. His eyes welled up with tears that he tried to hold back. He said, his voice choked, that Anna Lucy was a sweet, gentle young woman who loved that house and dreamed of building a happy family. But things started to change after she became pregnant. She began to exhibit strange symptoms, seizures, moments of mental confusion. Owen hired the best doctors, but none could give a definitive diagnosis. After Clara's birth, Anna Lucy worsened drastically. She could barely care for her daughter, spent entire days in bed, had episodes of high fever, and frequently lost consciousness. Then, suddenly, she was rushed to London, supposedly for experimental treatment. Days later, news of her death reached the mansion. No one saw the body. There was no wake, no clear explanations, just a sealed urn that was buried in the family cemetery. Camilla felt a lump in her throat. Everything was starting to make sense now. Anna Lucy had not died of a sudden illness. She had died from complications of a neurological disease that was never adequately diagnosed or treated. And now Clara was treading the same path. But why? Why did the family choose to hide the truth instead of seeking help? Elias, with still tear-filled eyes, whispered something that made Camilla freeze. He said that Lorena had promised to pay for his son's treatment, who was hospitalized with a serious illness in exchange for some favors. One was to get rid of old documents that could compromise the family's image. Another was to remain silent about everything he saw and heard inside that house. Elias said he deeply regretted it, that guilt gnawed at him, but that he had no choice. He needed to save his son, even if it meant betraying his own conscience. Camilla then understood that Elias was another victim of the web of manipulation that Lorena had woven. She placed her hand on the gardener's shoulder and said that he was not to blame, that he was just doing what any father would do to protect his child. But she also asked him to help her, that together they could make a difference for Clara, that there was still time to change the fate of that innocent child. Elias looked at Camilla with a mixture of fear and hope. He said he would do what he could, but that Camilla needed to be very careful, that Lorena was a dangerous woman, capable of terrible things to protect her interests. Camilla thanked him and returned to the nursery, feeling that she had gained an important ally in that unequal struggle. That night, as Clara slept peacefully in her crib, Camilla stayed awake, reflecting on everything she had discovered. She now had a clearer understanding of what was happening, but crucial pieces of the puzzle were still missing. Why did Lorena want to keep Clara sick? What was her benefit in hiding the diagnosis and denying adequate treatment? What did she gain from it? The answers to these questions would come soon, in a way Camilla could never imagine. But for now she knew she needed to continue observing, recording, collecting evidence. Because when she finally revealed the truth, she would need irrefutable evidence that not even the power and influence of the Sterlings could disprove. And as the night wore on, and Ashtonbury plunged into the icy silence of dawn, Camilla made a silent promise to Clara, to Anna Lucy's memory and to herself. She would not rest until the truth came to light, until justice was served, until that defenseless child had the chance at a full and healthy life that was rightfully hers. The revelation Elias had shared with Camilla completely changed the dynamic of her presence in the Sterling mansion. Now every gesture from Lorena was observed with suspicion, every word analyzed for ulterior motives, every decision related to Clara questioned internally. Camilla knew she was treading on dangerous ground, but the certainty that something profoundly wrong was happening there prevented her from backing down. The next morning, Camilla woke to Clara crying more than usual. It was a different cry, more intense, laden with discomfort that went beyond hunger or sleep. When she picked the baby up, she noticed her little body was too warm. The thermometer read 38.6 degrees Celsius. Clara also presented repetitive arm movements, small spasms that Camilla had seen before, but which now seemed more pronounced. She tried to calm the girl with affection, humming softly as she gently rocked her. Clara gradually began to calm down, but her gaze remained distant, as if she were in a place Camilla couldn't reach. It broke the nurse's heart. This was a child who should be discovering the world, smiling, interacting, but instead seemed trapped in a body that didn't respond adequately to her commands. Lorena entered the nursery shortly after, already impeccably dressed for the day, in a wine-colored silk, ensemble and high heels that echoed on the wooden floor. She observed Clara in Camilla's arms and asked with that controlled voice that had become familiar if there was a problem. Camilla mentioned the fever and spasms, trying to maintain a professional but firm tone. Lorena approached, touched Clara's forehead, and said to administer the usual antipyretic and maintain the routine. But this time, Camilla was not satisfied with the evasive answer. She said, looking directly into Lorena's eyes, that Clara needed an urgent neurological evaluation, that the symptoms were consistent with a serious condition that could not be neglected. Lorena stiffened her posture, and for a brief moment, her mask of cold politeness slipped, revealing a terrifying hardness in her gaze. She said, in a low voice but laden with veiled threat, that Camilla was overstepping the bounds of her responsibilities, that specialist doctors had already evaluated Clara, and that the treatment was being followed according to specific guidelines. She reminded Camilla of the confidentiality clause she had signed and suggested that, if she didn't feel comfortable with the house's dynamic, perhaps it would be better to look for another job. Camilla felt her blood boil, but forced herself to remain calm. She just nodded, seemingly submissive, but inside she was more determined than ever. Lorena left the nursery with firm steps, leaving behind a tense silence that seemed to weigh on Camilla's shoulders like an unbearable burden. That afternoon, while Clara napped, Camilla took the opportunity to speak discreetly with Mrs. Nair. The housekeeper was in the laundry room, folding white sheets with precise, automatic movements. Camilla offered to help, and the two worked in silence for a few minutes, before Camilla gathered the courage to ask about the other nannies who had worked there before her. "That's—" Nair paused for a moment, her hands holding a sheet halfway through folding. She looked around, making sure they were alone, and then said in a low voice that there had been 3 nannies before Camilla. The first stayed only 2 weeks and left, claiming the work was too stressful. The second lasted a month and was fired after openly questioning Clara's medical procedures. The third, a more experienced nurse, stayed almost 2 months, but ended up leaving abruptly without explanation, just packing her things in the middle of the night and departing. Camilla felt a chill. There was a clear pattern there. Any professional who questioned Clara's situation was quickly removed. Lorena maintained absolute control over who had access to the baby and how she was cared for. This was not just medical negligence, it was a calculated and systematic manipulation. But for what purpose? Mrs. Nair, still in a low voice, added something that made Camilla understand the dimension of what was at stake. She said she had overheard, by chance, a conversation between Lorena and a lawyer weeks ago. They were talking about inheritances, guardianships, and legal capacity. Mrs. Nair didn't understand everything, but it was clear that important legal issues were being discussed, and Clara was at the center of these issues. Camilla thanked her for the information and returned to the nursery with her mind racing. She needed to understand the legal structure involving Clara and the sterling fortune. She needed to find out who inherited what in different scenarios. And most importantly, she needed to find out Lorena's specific interest in keeping Clara in a precarious health condition. That night, after putting Clara to sleep, Camilla used her laptop to research inheritance law and child guardianship in the UK. She discovered that, in cases where a child was considered incapable of managing their own assets due to health reasons, a legal guardian could be appointed to administer the inheritance until the situation resolved or until the child reached adulthood. If Clara were officially diagnosed with a severe and permanent neurological condition, Owen, as her father, would be the natural guardian. But if he remarried, and depending on the testamentary clauses left by Anna Lucy, the new wife could have significant decision-making power over Clara's finances and future. That was the missing piece. Lorena didn't want Clara to be diagnosed and treated because she needed to keep her in a state of medical uncertainty until the marriage was formalized. Once married to Owen, she would have legal access to the family's assets and decision-making power over Clara. If the girl were diagnosed now, with proper treatment, she could improve significantly, and in the future be fully capable of managing her own inheritance. But if her condition were kept secret, without treatment, slowly deteriorating, Lorena could eventually use this to consolidate her control over the family's assets. It was a perverse, cold, and calculated plan. Camilla felt a wave of nausea as she realized the depth of the manipulation. Lorena was not just negligent, she was actively sabotaging Clara's treatment for her own benefit. But how to prove it? How to report something so complex and well orchestrated? Camilla decided she needed concrete evidence. She began to record everything more systematically. She discreetly filmed with her phone the moments when Clara experienced spasms. She photographed the bottles and their labels. She noted the times of medication and Clara's reactions. She saved everything in a password-protected digital cloud, creating a complete dossier that could eventually be used as evidence. But she knew she needed something more. She needed documents that proved a diagnosis was being hidden, a treatment denied, and for that she would have to risk even more. She would have to enter Lorena's office and access that brown notebook she always kept locked. The opportunity arose a few days later. Lorena had to travel to Edinburgh to resolve matters related to the wedding, which was scheduled for a month later. She would leave in the morning and return only in the late afternoon. Owen would also not be home. He had an important meeting in Chester that would last all day. It was the perfect chance, but also the riskiest. Camilla waited until the house was relatively empty. Mrs. Nair was busy in the kitchen, Elias in the gardens. The driver had taken Owen and would only return at the end of the day. She put Clara in her crib for her morning nap, made sure the baby was comfortable and safe, and then silently went down to Lorena's office. The door was locked, but Camilla had observed that Lorena kept a spare key hidden in a decorative vase in the corridor. She took the key with trembling hands, opened the door and quickly entered, closing it behind her. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it echoing in her ears. Lorena's office was organized with obsessive precision. Every document had its place, every book was perfectly aligned, every pen was in its exact position. Camilla went directly to the drawer where she had seen Lorena keep the brown notebook. It was locked, but the lock was simple. She used the bobby pin again and, after a few seconds of tension, managed to open it. The notebook was there, with an aged leather cover and slightly yellowed pages. Camilla carefully picked it up and began to leaf through it. What she found left her breathless. These were detailed notes about Clara, but not the kind a person concerned about a child's health would make. They were cold, calculated records of symptoms, crises, and reactions to different medications. There were tables, graphs, comparative analyses. It was as if Lorena was conducting an experiment, testing different approaches to keep Clara in a specific state of illness, neither improving nor drastically worsening. There were also copies of legal documents. One was Anna Lucy's will, which left most of her personal inheritance to Clara, but with the clause that, if the girl were deemed permanently incapacitated, the assets would be managed by the father, and in the event of remarriage, the new wife would have the right to a significant percentage of the management of these assets. Another document was a prenuptial agreement between Owen and Lorena, which stipulated that, after the marriage, Lorena would have the right to participate in financial and medical decisions related to Clara. Camilla photographed every page of the notebook and documents with her phone, making sure the images were clear and legible. She was sweating, her hands trembling, but she knew this was the proof she needed. It was evidence that Lorena was deliberately keeping Clara sick to ensure her control over the family's fortune. When she finished, Camilla put everything back exactly as it was, locked the drawer, left the office, returned the key to the vase and quickly went up to the nursery. Clara still slept peacefully, oblivious to the drama unfolding around her. Camilla sat in the nursing armchair, breathing deeply. trying to calm her heart, which felt like it wanted to leap out of her chest. She had done it, she had the proof, but now came the hardest part, deciding what to do with it. If she reported it to the authorities, it could take months for anything to be done, and in that time, Clara could suffer irreversible consequences. If she confronted Lorena directly, she would be immediately fired and probably prevented from any contact with the child. If she told Owen, there was a risk he wouldn't believe her. After all, Lorena had woven a web of manipulation that included even him. Camilla decided she needed an ally with enough power and influence to act quickly. She thought of her former medical ethics professor from college, Dr. Mark Thompson, who now worked as a consultant for the public prosecutor's office in cases of child neglect. He was known for his integrity and his determination to protect children's rights. That night, Camilla called Dr. Mark and told him the whole story from the beginning. She sent the photographs of the documents, the videos of Clara's spasms, the notes she had made about the symptoms. Dr. Mark listened attentively, asking specific questions about technical and contextual details. When Camilla finished, he remained silent for a few seconds that seemed eternal. Then, in a serious but encouraging voice, Dr. Mark said that this was a very serious case of intentional medical negligence and possible misappropriation of inheritance through manipulation of a minor's health status. He said he would immediately initiate a discreet investigation involving Child Protective Services, an independent medical team, and, if necessary, the courts. But he also warned Camilla that she needed to be extremely careful in the coming days, as Lorena might realize something was wrong and act desperately. Camilla thanked him and hung up, feeling for the first time in weeks a mixture of hope and fear. Hope that Clara would finally receive the help she deserved. Fear of what might happen before that help arrived. In the following days, Camilla maintained an even more discreet posture. She followed all of Lorena's instructions without questioning, smiled politely, and adhered to the established routine. But internally she was counting the hours until Dr. Mark and his team could act. She knew that each day of waiting was another day Clara suffered unnecessarily, another day the girl's condition deteriorated due to lack of adequate treatment. Lorena, for her part, seemed increasingly tense. She made constant calls, locked in her office, her voice occasionally rising in irritation. Camilla noticed that something was bothering Owen's future wife, but she couldn't identify exactly what. Perhaps it was just the stress of the approaching wedding, or perhaps she had realized that someone was discovering her secrets. One night, Camilla woke up startled by a strange noise coming from the nursery. It was almost 2 a.m. She quickly got up and rushed to Clara's room. Upon opening the door, she saw Lorena next to the crib, holding a syringe. The scene paralyzed her for an instant. Lorena turned abruptly, and for a second the two women stared at each other in a silence charged with tension. Lorena was the first to speak, her voice controlled but with a cutting coldness. She said she was just administering Clara's nighttime medication, that the baby had woken up with a fever and needed immediate care. Camilla looked at the syringe and then at Clara, who seemed more apathetic than usual. She knew that this was not prescribed medication, that something was wrong with the situation, but she also knew that she couldn't confront Lorena there at that moment, alone in the middle of the night. She simply said, keeping her voice firm, that she could take over the care from then on, that it was her responsibility as a nurse. Lorena hesitated, her fingers squeezing the syringe hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Then, with a cold, calculated smile, she said that everything was under control, that Camilla should go back to her room and rest. Camilla knew she couldn't insist without raising even greater suspicions. She nodded, seemingly submissive, and left the nursery. But instead of returning to her studio apartment, she hid in the corridor, observing through the crack in the door. Lorena stayed a few more minutes by the crib, making notes in her notebook, checking Clara's breathing, adjusting the blanket. When Lorena finally left, Camilla waited until she heard the footsteps completely fade before entering the nursery again. Clara was sleeping, but her breathing seemed irregular. Her lips were slightly purplish. Camilla checked the baby's vital signs and confirmed her suspicion. Her heart rate was lower than normal, and her oxygen saturation was also low. This was not therapeutic medication. It was something that was depressing Clara's central nervous system. Camilla felt a wave of panic and anger. Lorena was not just neglecting Clara, she was actively harming the girl's health. This was criminal, unacceptable, monstrous. Camilla grabbed her phone and immediately called Dr. Mark, even though it was the middle of the night. She described what she had just witnessed, her voice trembling with contained emotion. Dr. Mark said the situation was even more serious than he imagined, that they needed to act immediately. He promised that the next morning, a team from Child Protective Services and specialist doctors would be at the Sterling mansion with a court order to evaluate Clara and, if necessary, temporarily remove her from Lorena's care. He asked Camilla to remain vigilant throughout the night, not to leave Clara alone for a minute. Camilla spent the rest of the night awake, sitting in the armchair beside Clara's crib, observing the baby's every breath, praying for dawn to come soon, and with it, the help they so desperately awaited. She thought of Anna Lucy, the mother who never had the chance to see her daughter grow up, who died without anyone discovering the truth about her condition. Camilla promised herself that she would not let the same tragedy repeat itself with Clara. When the first rays of sun began to illuminate the nursery, through the curtains Camilla heard the sound of cars arriving. She got up and looked out the window. They were two official vehicles with the insignia of Child Protective Services and the Public Prosecutor's Office. Dr. Mark had kept his promise. Help had arrived. Camilla picked Clara up, wrapped her in a soft blanket, and whispered in her tiny ear, "Everything will be all right now, little one. No one will hurt you again. I promise." The nursery door burst open. It was Mrs. Nair with wide eyes and a tense voice, saying that there were strange people in the house, that Lorena was screaming in the entrance hall, that Owen had been abruptly woken up. Camilla just smiled, a smile of relief and victory, and said that finally the truth was coming to light. She descended the stairs with Clara in her arms, feeling each step as a stride towards justice, freedom, and hope. When she reached the entrance hall, she found a controlled commotion. Lorena was heatedly arguing with a social worker, demanding explanations, threatening to sue everyone. Owen stood beside her, pale and confused, trying to understand what was happening. Dr. Mark was there, accompanied by 2 doctors and 3 representatives from Child Protective Services. He approached Camilla with an encouraging smile and said, "You did the right thing. Clara will receive all the help she needs now." Owen approached, his eyes fixed on his daughter in Camilla's arms. He asked, his voice choked, what was happening. Dr. Mark explained clearly but respectfully that there were indications of intentional medical negligence and that Clara needed to be immediately evaluated by independent specialists. He showed the documents that substantiated the accusations, the photographs of Lorena's notebook, the records of inadequate medications. Owen looked at Lorena, who visibly paled. He asked, with a voice that mixed pain and disbelief if that was true. Lorena tried to argue, said she was just following medical guidelines, that everything was a misunderstanding, but her voice trembled, her defensive posture betraying her. The medical team took Clara for a preliminary examination in a makeshift room. Camilla accompanied them, refusing to leave the baby alone for even a second. The doctors confirmed what she already knew. Clara showed clear signs of epileptic encephalopathy, with infantile spasms characteristic of West syndrome. But even more seriously, she showed signs of drug intoxication, indicating that inadequate substances were being administered that aggravated her condition instead of treating it. The revelation hit the Sterling mansion like a bomb. Lorena was prevented from having any contact with Clara and was notified that she would face criminal charges for neglect and abuse. Owen, devastated by the discovery, repeatedly apologized to Camilla, saying that he had blindly trusted Lorena, that he hadn't realized what was happening right under his nose. Camilla merely held his hand and said that the important thing now was to take care of Clara, to give her all the treatment and love she deserved. Owen agreed, his tears finally flowing freely, washing away years of denial and suppressed pain. Clara was admitted to a specialized hospital in Edinburgh, where she would immediately begin appropriate treatment for her condition. The doctors were optimistic. With early intervention, Clara had a strong chance of leading a full and healthy life, with proper development and full control of epileptic seizures. Camilla remained by Clara's side throughout her hospitalization, refusing to leave her even for a moment. She had become more than a nurse to that child. She had become her protector, her voice, her defender, and nothing and no one could change that now. 3 months had passed since that dramatic morning at the Sterling mansion. Autumn had arrived in Ashtonbury, painting the trees in golden and reddish hues, and bringing with it a renewal that seemed to mirror the transformations everyone had undergone. Clara was unrecognizable, not by appearance, but by the vitality she now radiated. Her little eyes, once glazed and distant, sparkled with curiosity and joy. Her smile, once non-existent, now came easily at the slightest stimulus. Her movements, once limited and spastic, were now coordinated and full of life. Treatment for West syndrome had begun immediately after her hospitalization. The doctors at the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary, renowned specialists in pediatric neurology, established a rigorous protocol that included specific anticonvulsant medication, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, and psychological support for the entire family. The first few days were difficult. Clara had to go through a detoxification process from the inadequate substances Lorena had been administering, which caused some withdrawal episodes that frightened everyone. But Camilla never left her side. She slept in a makeshift armchair next to the hospital crib, woke at every movement of the baby, participated in all therapy sessions, learning every technique the professionals taught. She had transformed from a hired nurse into a maternal figure whom Clara recognized and sought in moments of discomfort. When the baby cried, it was Camilla's lap that calmed her. When she smiled, it was Camilla's face she looked for. Owen was also present, but in a different way. He was destroyed by guilt and shame for not having realized what was happening under his own roof. In the first few days after the revelation, he could barely look at Clara without tears streaming down his face. He felt like an unworthy father, a man who had failed in the only mission that truly mattered, protecting his daughter. But over time, and with the help of a therapist Dr. Mark had recommended, Owen began to understand that he too had been a victim of elaborate and cruel manipulation. Lorena had taken advantage of his vulnerability after Anna Lucy's death, his ignorance of medical matters, his excessive trust. She had woven such a complex web that even an intelligent and successful man like him had been completely deceived. The criminal proceedings against Lorena progressed rapidly. The evidence collected by Camilla, combined with the testimonies of Elias, Mrs. Nair, and the very doctors who were now evaluating Clara, built a solid and irrefutable case. Lorena was formally charged with abuse, intentional medical negligence, misappropriation of inheritance through manipulation of a minor's health status, and falsification of medical documents. Her lawyer tried to argue that she was merely following the advice of professionals she had consulted, but the evidence clearly showed otherwise. The trial was swift and decisive. Lorena was sentenced to 8 years in prison, in addition to being ordered to return all funds she had received from Owen during the engagement period, and to pay significant compensation that would be deposited into a trust fund for Clara. The judge, in delivering the sentence, said that cases like this were rare but extremely serious, as they involved the conscious manipulation of a defenseless child's health for purely financial gain. News of the case resonated throughout the southern region of the country. Local newspapers covered every development of the process, always taking care to protect Clara's identity, but widely exposing the details of the fraud orchestrated by Lorena. Ashtonbury society, which had always seen the Sterling family as a symbol of success and respectability, was shocked by the revelation. But most people showed support for Owen and admiration for Camilla's courage. Camilla, in turn, became a kind of local heroine. She received invitations to give lectures at universities on professional ethics and child protection. The Scottish Nursing and Midwifery Council honoured her with a commendation for her exemplary conduct. Several hospitals and clinics offered her positions with generous salaries, but Camilla declined them all. She had found her purpose alongside Clara, and she had no intention of abandoning her now. Owen officially proposed that Camilla remain as Clara's nurse and guardian, no longer as an employee, but as part of the family. He said he recognized that Clara needed her as much as she needed him, and that he would be eternally grateful for everything she had done. Camilla accepted, moved, but set some conditions. She wanted the house to be transformed into a more welcoming and less controlling environment. She wanted Clara to grow up surrounded by affection, freedom, and transparency. And she wanted Owen to genuinely involve himself in his daughter's upbringing, to be present not just physically, but emotionally. Owen agreed to all conditions. More than that, he began to make profound changes in his own life. He drastically reduced his business, trips, delegated more responsibilities to trusted managers, and began to dedicate much of his time to Clara. He learned to change nappies, prepare bottles, and sing lullabies. He discovered, to his own surprise, that he was capable of being not just a financial provider, but a loving and present father. The Sterling mansion also underwent visible transformations. The walls were repainted in more vibrant and cheerful colors. The minimalist and cold artworks gave way to family photographs and colorful paintings with childish motifs. The nursery was completely remodeled, transforming into a cozy and stimulating room full of educational toys, books, and decor that celebrated childhood. Security cameras were reduced to the necessary minimum, and the atmosphere of constant surveillance gave way to an atmosphere of trust and tranquility. Elias continued working as a gardener, but now with a weight lifted from his shoulders. His son had fully recovered from the illness that afflicted him, and he could finally sleep in peace, knowing that he had helped to do the right thing. He became a loving presence in Clara's life, always bringing fresh flowers to her room and telling stories about the birds and plants in the garden. Mrs. Nair also remained in the house, but now in a very different environment. She allowed herself to be more human, more affectionate. She, who had always been so rigid and distant, now smiled when she saw Clara take her first supported steps, applauded her small progress, and even sang softly while she worked. It was as if the revelation of the truth had freed not only Clara, but everyone who lived in that house. Camilla, in her moments of reflection, thought a lot about Anna Lucy. She had visited Owen's first wife's grave a few times, bringing flowers and silently conversing with the woman she never knew personally. Camilla felt that, in some way, she had completed a mission that Anna Lucy could not fulfill in life. She had protected Clara, revealed the truth, and ensured that the girl would have the chance at a full and happy life. Owen also began to visit Anna Lucy's grave more frequently. He asked forgiveness for not having noticed her illness in time, for having trusted the wrong people, for having allowed his daughter to suffer unnecessarily. But he also thanked her for having had a second chance, for having found in Camilla someone who truly cared, for now being able to build a true relationship with Clara. One day, 6 months after the start of treatment, Clara took her first steps alone. It was during a physiotherapy session at home, with Camilla and Owen watching attentively. The baby, now 1 year and 2 months old, was supported by a colorful walker. Suddenly, she let go of the walker and took 3 wobbly but determined steps towards Camilla, who was kneeling a few feet away with her arms open. Camilla picked her up, laughing and crying at the same time. Owen approached and hugged both of them, his voice choked with emotion, saying, "My girl, my warrior, you did it." It was a moment of pure joy, a celebration of a victory that had been achieved through much struggle, courage, and love. The doctors who monitored Clara were impressed with her progress. The treatment had been extremely effective, and the epileptic seizures had been completely controlled. Clara no longer showed the spasms that were so frightening at first. Her cognitive development was within expectations for her age, and there were even signs that she could fully recover from the initial delay. It was a true miracle of medicine combined with the transformative power of love and proper care. Camilla had also transformed in that process. She, who had arrived at the Sterling mansion insecure, unemployed, and merely seeking financial stability, was now a confident, fulfilled woman with a clear purpose in her life. She had discovered that her professional value went far beyond following routines and administering medications. She was capable of making a difference, of fighting for what was right, of protecting the most vulnerable, even when it meant risking everything. Her mother, Mrs. Helen, frequently visited the mansion and was enchanted to see Clara's transformation and the special relationship her daughter had built with the baby. She said with pride in her eyes that she had always known Camilla was special, that she had a heart too big to settle for an ordinary life. And she was right. 1 year after that dramatic morning that changed everything, the Sterling mansion hosted a small party to celebrate Clara's 2nd birthday. It was not a pompous or ostentatious party, but an intimate and welcoming celebration, with colorful balloons, a simple but delicious chocolate cake made by the cook, and modest but thoughtfully chosen gifts. Present were Camilla and her mother, Owen and some close relatives he had reconnected with, Elias and Mrs. Nair, Dr. Mark, and some of the doctors who had treated Clara, and even Robert, the friend who had helped Camilla at the beginning of her investigation. It was a small group, but each person there had played an important role in the story of that child's salvation. Clara, dressed in a pink dress with butterfly prints, was radiant. She ran around the garden chasing soap bubbles that Elias blew for her. She laughed loudly, a clear and free laugh that was the most beautiful music anyone there could hear. She called Camilla Cammy and had recently started calling Owen Daddy, a word that filled his heart with emotion every time he heard it. When it was time to sing Happy Birthday, everyone gathered around the table where the cake was decorated with colorful candles in the shape of the number 2. Camilla held Clara in her lap, while Owen stood beside her, with a hand on each of their shoulders. They sang together, off-key but happy, and Clara clapped enthusiastically at the end of the song. Owen gave a brief speech, his voice trembling with emotion. He said that it was the happiest day of his life, not because it was his daughter's birthday, but because he finally had his daughter back, healthy, happy, and surrounded by people who truly loved her. He thanked Camilla, saying that she was an angel God had placed in his path when he needed it most, and that he would be eternally grateful for her courage and dedication. Camilla, with tears in her eyes but a smile on her face, replied that she was the one who was grateful, for Clara had given a purpose and meaning to her life that she didn't even know she was looking for. She said that this little girl had taught her about courage, resilience, and the transformative power of unconditional love. Dr. Mark also spoke, saying that Clara's case should serve as an example and a warning to all society. He said that many children suffer silently, victims of neglect, abuse, or manipulation, and that it is the responsibility of all of us to be vigilant, to question what doesn't seem right, and to act when necessary. He praised Camilla for having the courage to do exactly that, even at the risk of losing everything. The afternoon passed quickly, filled with laughter, conversations, and games. Clara fell asleep in Camilla's lap, exhausted but happy, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in pink and orange hues. Owen watched the scene with a feeling of peace he hadn't experienced in years. He knew he had lost a lot of time, that he had made serious mistakes, but he also knew that he had the chance to build a different future for his daughter. When the guests left and the house returned to silence, Camilla took Clara to her room and gently placed her in her crib. She adjusted the girl's favorite blanket, the one with stars and moons, and stayed a few minutes just watching Clara sleep. That peaceful little face, breathing softly, was living proof that it is worth fighting for what is right, that an act of courage can change destinies, that love and dedication have the power to overcome even the most terrible adversities. Owen appeared at the bedroom door, observing the scene in silence. When Camilla turned to leave, he hugged her, a sincere embrace full of gratitude. He said, in a low voice so as not to wake Clara, that she would always be part of that family, that Clara would have 2 people who would love and protect her unconditionally, and that he could never repay everything she had done. Camilla simply smiled and said there was nothing to repay, that being there by Clara's side, watching her grow and develop, was the greatest reward she could have. And it was true. Camilla had discovered her true calling, not just as a nurse, but as a protector, a defender of the voiceless, someone capable of making a difference when it truly mattered. In the months that followed, life at the Sterling mansion found a new rhythm, lighter, more loving. Clara continued her impressive development, surprising the doctors at each appointment. She began to speak her first words, to show her own preferences and personality, to become a curious and joyful child like any other her age. Camilla remained by her side, but now with a role that went beyond professional. She was the maternal figure Clara never had the chance to know in Ana Lucy. She was the person Clara ran to when she got hurt, to whom she told her small discoveries, with whom she shared her most genuine smiles. Owen also transformed completely. The cold and distant man Camilla had first met gave way to a present and affectionate father. He learned to play, to tell stories, to make funny faces that made Clara burst into laughter. He discovered that professional success and money meant very little compared to his daughter's smile. The story of Clara's salvation became a legend in Ashtonbury. People spoke admiringly of the courageous nurse who had risked everything to protect an innocent child. Some said it was fate, others that it was the hand of God. But Camilla knew it was simply the result of doing the right thing, even when it was difficult and frightening. She often thought of Ana Lucy, the mother who had not had the same luck as Clara. Camilla imagined that, from somewhere, Ana Lucy was at peace knowing that her daughter was safe, loved and happy. She promised herself that she would continue to honor Ana Lucy's memory by ensuring that Clara grew up knowing the truth about her biological mother, about the disease they both shared, and about the importance of never hiding the truth out of fear or shame. On a winter afternoon, exactly a year and a half after that transformative morning, Camilla sat in the garden watching Clara play on the grass. The girl, now 2.5 years old, chased butterflies, her laughter echoing through Ashtonbury's cold, crisp air. Owen sat beside Camilla, and they remained in contemplative silence for a few minutes. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "Thank you for not giving up on her. Thank you for being stronger and braver than I was. Thank you for saving my daughter when I didn't even realize she needed saving." Camilla held his hand and replied, "You saved her too, Owen. You had the humility to acknowledge your mistakes, the courage to change, and the love needed to become the father she needed. We saved Clara together, each doing our part." And it was true. Clara's salvation had not been the work of one person alone, but the result of several people making the right choice at crucial moments. Camilla had had the courage to investigate and report. Elias had had the courage to confess and help. Mrs. Nair had had the courage to testify. Dr. Mark had had the dedication to act quickly. And Owen had had the humility to admit he was wrong and completely change his stance. Together, they had rewritten the destiny of a child who was condemned to a life of suffering and limitations. Together, they had proven that it is possible to overcome even the most elaborate manipulations when one has determination and courage. Clara ran to them, breathless and with rosy cheeks from the cold and play. She threw herself into Camilla's lap, asking for water, and then hugged her father, asking to be held. Owen picked her up, spun her around as she laughed, and then the three remained there, embraced, forming a family that had been born from the most improbable circumstances, but was as real and true as any other. That image, of the three together in the Sterling mansion garden, with the winter sun illuminating their smiling faces, was living proof that new beginnings are possible, that mistakes can be corrected, that truth always finds its way, and that love, when genuine and selfless, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Camilla Hayes had entered that mansion months ago as an unemployed nurse seeking stability. She left. It now transformed into a heroine, a protector, a mother by heart. And most importantly, she had discovered that her life had a greater purpose than she had ever imagined. Clara now had the chance to grow up healthy, happy, and loved. She would carry the invisible scars of her first months of life, but she would also have the resilience of one who survived and triumphed. She would forever be a testament to the transformative power of courage and love. And Owen, the man who almost lost everything by trusting the wrong people, now had the opportunity to be the father he always should have been. He had learned in the most painful way possible that wealth and power mean very little if they are not used to protect what truly matters. As the sun set over Ashtonbury, painting the sky with impossible colors, Camilla looked at Clara and Owen and felt a deep peace invade her heart. She had made a difference. She had changed a destiny. She had saved a life. And at that moment, with Clara laughing in her arms and Owen smiling by her side, Camilla whispered to herself the same words she had said on that decisive dawn months ago. but now with a completely different meaning. I know what she has. She has love. She has a future. She has life. And no one will ever take that from her again. 2 years had passed since Clara's memorable birthday. The girl was now 4.5 years old, and she was a vibrant, curious, and full-of-life child. Her brown hair had grown into loose curls that Camilla loved to comb every morning, adorning them with colorful bows that Clara chose with her own opinion and determination. The Sterling mansion, once a cold mausoleum of secrets and silence, now echoed with children's laughter, cheerful songs, and the chaotic and wonderful energy of a child in full development. But the peace achieved with so much struggle was about to be tested again. One spring morning, as Camilla prepared Clara's breakfast in the spacious kitchen that now had a specially decorated corner for the girl, Owen's phone rang insistently. He answered, and Camilla immediately noticed from the change in his expression that something serious was happening. Owen turned pale. His fingers gripped the phone so tightly that his knuckles whitened, and his voice, normally firm and controlled, trembled as he responded only in monosyllables. When he hung up, he sat heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, his gaze lost and his hands trembling. Camilla approached, placed her hand on his shoulder, and asked what had happened. Owen took a deep breath, ran his hands over his face, and said that Lorena had managed to reduce her sentence for good behavior and was about to be transferred to a semi-open regime. Worse still, her lawyer had filed a request for a review of the case, claiming that she had been convicted based on evidence obtained irregularly and that she deserved a new trial. Camilla felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The idea that Lorena could again have any kind of influence over their lives was terrifying. She immediately thought of Clara, who fortunately was in the garden playing with Elias, oblivious to the storm that was approaching. Camilla knew they needed to act quickly, that they could not allow all the progress achieved to be threatened by someone who had already caused so much suffering. Owen explained that Lorena's lawyer was arguing that the photographs Camilla had taken of the notebook and documents in the office constituted an invasion of privacy and therefore could not be used as evidence. He also claimed that Lorena had been influenced by undiagnosed psychological problems at the time and that she deserved treatment instead of punishment. It was a well-crafted legal strategy, and there was a real possibility that it would work. Camilla felt a mixture of anger and fear. How was it possible that someone who had deliberately harmed a defenseless child could even have the chance to reduce her sentence? But she knew that the justice system was complex and that they needed to be prepared to face this new battle. She suggested that they immediately contact Dr. Mark, who had been instrumental in the first phase of the process and would certainly know how to proceed. Dr. Mark answered Owen's call with his usual promptness. He listened attentively to the explanation about the review request and, after a few minutes of reflection, said that the situation was delicate but not desperate. He explained that the evidence collected by Camilla, although legally controversial, had been subsequently validated by official investigations that confirmed all the accusations. Furthermore, the testimonies of Elias, Mrs. Nair, and especially the doctors who treated Clara were solid evidence that supported the conviction regardless of the photographs. However, Dr. Mark warned that it would be important to prepare Clara for the possibility that Lorena's name might be mentioned again, that there might be movement of lawyers, social workers, and perhaps even a new psychological evaluation of the girl. He suggested that Camilla and Owen talk to the child psychologist who had been accompanying Clara since the beginning of her treatment, so that she could help the child process this situation in a healthy way. That afternoon, while Clara napped after lunch, Camilla and Owen sat on the veranda overlooking the gardens and talked at length about how to proceed. Owen was visibly shaken, not only by the legal threat, but by the guilt he still carried for having trusted Lorena in the first place. He said, with a choked voice, that he felt responsible for exposing Clara to this new trauma, that he should have been more careful, more suspicious. Camilla held his hands in hers and said, firmly but also affectionately, that he could not blame himself eternally for something that was beyond his control. Lorena was a skilled manipulator who had deceived not only him, but everyone around her. The important thing now was to protect Clara, and they would do it together, as they had done before, and as they would continue to do whenever necessary. Owen looked at Camilla with that gaze she knew well, a look of deep gratitude, but also something more, something that had been quietly growing between them over the past 2 years. They had become an unconventional family, united not by blood or marriage, but by a shared love for Clara and a partnership built in moments of adversity. There was a connection between them that went beyond a professional relationship or even friendship. It was something deeper and more complex that neither of them had verbalized yet. Camilla felt her heart race under that gaze, but quickly averted her eyes, focusing on the immediate problem. She knew that her feelings for Owen had changed over time, that admiration and respect had transformed into something more intense, but she also knew that she needed to be cautious, that Clara was the absolute priority, and that any change in their dynamic would need to be carefully considered. In the following days, the house's routine was filled with meetings with lawyers, conversations with Dr. Mark, and extra sessions with Clara's psychologist. The girl noticed that something was different, that the adults around her were more tense, more worried. She asked Camilla, with that disarming sincerity of children, if she had done something wrong, if that was why everyone was sad. Camilla picked her up, sat in Clara's favorite armchair in the room, and explained with simple but honest words that sometimes complicated things happened in the adult world, but that none of it had anything to do with her, and that everything would be okay because she had many people who loved her and would always protect her. Clara seemed satisfied with the explanation, hugged Camilla tightly, and said that she was her favorite person in the whole world and that she never wanted her to leave. Those words touched Camilla in a way she hadn't expected. She realized that Clara saw her not just as a caregiver or a nurse, but as a maternal figure, as someone essential in her life. And Camilla, who had never thought much about motherhood before meeting Clara, now couldn't imagine her life without that child. Clara had become her heart's daughter, and she would do anything to protect her. Lorena's request for a review of the case was formally presented to the court 2 weeks later. The hearing was scheduled for a month later, and both the defense and the prosecution would have to present their arguments and evidence again. Dr. Mark worked tirelessly to ensure that all documents were in order, that all testimonies were updated, and that Clara was spared as much as possible from any unnecessary exposure. A week before the hearing, something unexpected happened. Camilla received a call from an unknown number. When she answered, she froze upon hearing the voice on the other end. It was Lorena. She had managed to get access to a phone and was calling Camilla directly. Her voice was different from what Camilla remembered, less controlled, more desperate. Lorena said she needed to talk, that there were things Camilla didn't know, that the truth was more complicated than it seemed. Camilla felt a wave of anger and repulsion, but also curiosity. She asked in a cold voice what Lorena could possibly have to say that would make any difference after everything she had done. Lorena took a deep breath and said that she never really wanted to hurt Clara, that everything had gotten out of control, that she too was a victim of circumstances no one knew about. Camilla didn't believe a word, but decided to listen. Lorena explained that she had become involved with Owen shortly after Anna Lucy's death, at a time when he was vulnerable and lost. She said that she truly fell in love with him, but soon discovered that his family was in much deeper debt than they appeared, that the businesses were on the verge of bankruptcy, and that Anna Lucy's inheritance, which was supposed to go to Clara, was the only thing that could save the situation. She admitted that she had manipulated Clara's health situation, but claimed that she never intended to cause permanent harm, only to keep the girl in a state that would justify Owen's full guardianship, and eventually her own after the marriage. Lorena said she deeply regretted it, that prison had given her time to reflect on her choices, and that now she only wanted a chance to redeem herself, to somehow contribute to Clara's well-being even from afar. Camilla listened in silence, her mind quickly processing that information. If it was true that Owen's businesses were in financial crisis, that would explain many things, but it in no way justified what Lorena had done. She said, in a firm voice with no room for doubt, that there was no possible redemption for someone who had deliberately harmed an innocent child, that Lorena would have to live with the consequences of her choices, and that she would never have any kind of access or influence over Clara. Lorena tried to argue a little more, but Camilla hung up the phone. She stood still for a few minutes, processing the conversation. Then she decided she needed to tell Owen everything, especially the part about the financial difficulties Lorena had mentioned. If that was true, there were important issues that needed to be discussed openly. That night, after putting Clara to sleep, Camilla sought Owen in his office. He was reviewing documents, his expression tired and worried. Camilla told him about Lorena's call, about everything she had said. Owen listened in silence, and when Camilla mentioned the financial difficulties, he sighed deeply and admitted that that part was true. He explained that in the last years of Anna, Lucy's life, he had made risky investments trying to expand his businesses, and many of them had gone wrong. When Anna Lucy passed away, he discovered that she had left most of her personal inheritance, which was considerable, directly to Clara. He only had access to these resources as a guardian, to cover his daughter's care and education, but he could not use the money to save his businesses. Lorena had discovered this situation and offered a solution. If they married, and if Clara was deemed permanently incapable of managing her own assets, they could have more freedom to manage the inheritance in a way that benefited the entire family, including the businesses. Owen admitted that at first, the proposal had seemed reasonable, that he truly believed Clara had a serious and irreversible condition, and that using part of the inheritance to stabilize the family could be justifiable. But he swore he never knew Lorena was actively sabotaging Clara's treatment. He thought she was just being cautious, following conservative medical guidelines. When the truth was revealed, he was horrified and understood the extent of the manipulation. Since then, he had worked to restructure his businesses in an honest and sustainable way without depending on Clara's inheritance. Camilla listened attentively, and although she felt a pang of disappointment that Owen had not been completely transparent about the financial situation before, she also understood that he was trying to protect his privacy and his pride. She said that she appreciated his honesty, but that from now on they needed to be completely open with each other, without secrets, because Clara depended on them to make the best possible decisions. Owen agreed, and then said something that surprised Camilla. He said that he had realized over the past 2 years that Camilla was not just an employee or even a friend. She was the most important person in his life along with Clara. She was the one who kept him strong in difficult times, who inspired him to be a better man, who had transformed that house into a real home. He said he knew their situation was complicated, that there was an age difference, a social context difference, life experience differences. But he could no longer deny that his feelings for her had grown beyond gratitude and respect. He was falling in love with her and wanted to know if there was any possibility that she felt the same. Camilla was speechless. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure Owen could hear it. She looked at the man who had changed so much since she met him, who had gone from a cold, absent businessman to a dedicated and loving father. She thought of all the moments they had shared, the laughter, the worries, the victories, and the challenges. And she realized that she too had fallen in love with him, perhaps without even realizing when it happened. She said, her voice trembling with emotion, that she also felt something deep for him, but that they had to be very careful. Clara was the absolute priority, and any change in their relationship would need to be made with the girl's well-being in mind. They couldn't risk confusing Clara or creating a situation that could be emotionally destabilizing for her. Owen agreed completely. He said he was in no hurry, that the important thing was that now they knew what they felt for each other, and that they could build something solid and true over time, at the right pace, always putting Clara first. He extended his hand to Camilla, and she took it, feeling a connection that went far beyond the physical, a connection of souls that had met in the most improbable circumstances. The hearing for Lorena's case review took place on a cold, rainy morning. The courtroom was full of lawyers, journalists, and curious onlookers. Camilla and Owen sat side by side, their hands discreetly intertwined beneath the table. Dr. Mark was confident. He had prepared a solid defense based not on the controversial photographs, but on the medical and testimonial evidence that proved Lorena's actions beyond a shadow of a doubt. Lorena's lawyer eloquently argued about his client's rights, about alleged irregularities in the process, about the psychological problems she supposedly suffered at the time of the events. But when it was the prosecution's turn, Dr. Mark presented a series of devastating pieces of evidence. He brought in the doctors who had treated Clara, who explained in technical detail how proper treatment had completely transformed the girl's life, and how the absence of that treatment in the first months had been criminal. He brought Elias, who testified about the conversations he had with Lorena, about the documents she asked him to destroy, about the emotional manipulation she exerted over him. He brought Mrs. Nair, who confirmed the inconsistencies in the medications, the suspicious behaviors, the atmosphere of secrecy and control that Lorena maintained. And finally, he presented a recent psychological report on Clara, made by independent professionals, which showed a healthy, well-adjusted and happy child, completely different from the apathetic and sick child she was when under Lorena's influenced care. The contrast was so striking that it was impossible to deny the causal relationship between Lorena's actions and Clara's suffering. The judge heard all arguments, analyzed all evidence, and after a brief deliberation, denied the review request. He stated that the evidence against Lorena was overwhelming and that there was no procedural irregularity that would justify a new trial. The conviction was upheld, and Lorena would continue to serve her sentence. Camilla and Owen left the courtroom feeling an enormous weight lifted from their shoulders. They hugged Dr. Mark with sincere gratitude, thanked the lawyers and witnesses, and returned home, where Clara awaited them with Mrs. Nair. The girl ran to them as soon as they entered, and they picked her up together, forming a collective hug that lasted long minutes. That night, after a quiet dinner and putting Clara to sleep, Camilla and Owen sat on the veranda under Ashtonbury's starry sky. They talked about the future, about their plans, about the possibility of building a life together officially. Owen said he didn't want to rush anything, but that he would like, when the time was right, to propose marriage to Camilla properly. Camilla smiled, feeling a happiness she hadn't experienced in years. She said she wanted that too, but that they needed to talk to Clara first, prepare her for this change, ensure she understood and accepted the new family configuration. After all, Clara already saw them as her parents, but formalizing it legally and emotionally was an important step that needed to be taken carefully. The following months were a smooth and happy transition. Camilla and Owen began to act more openly as a couple, although they still maintained separate rooms and were discreet in front of Clara until the girl was ready to fully understand. They took family outings together, had special dinners, and took short trips to the coast or the hills. Clara flourished amidst all this love. She started attending a nursery school where she made friends and stood out for her intelligence and creativity. Her teachers were impressed to learn that she had gone through so many difficulties in her first months of life, because now she was a completely normal child and even above average in many aspects. Camilla also grew professionally. She was invited to give lectures at universities and nursing conferences on professional ethics and child protection. Her story inspired young professionals to always put the patient's well-being above any other consideration. She became a reference in the field, but never let that distance her from Clara, who remained her #1 priority. A year after the hearing, that confirmed Lorena's conviction. On a sunny summer afternoon, Owen organized a special picnic in the mansion's garden. He invited Mrs. Helen, Camilla's mother, Elias and Mrs. Nair, Dr. Mark, and some close family friends. Clara was radiant, running through the garden in a yellow floral dress, chasing butterflies and laughing non-stop. When everyone was gathered, Owen asked for everyone's attention. He took Clara's hand, called Camilla close, and, in front of all those they loved, and who had been an important part of their journey, he knelt down and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. He said that he had learned, through the most difficult experiences of his life, that family is not defined only by blood, but by love, dedication, and choice. He said that Camilla had entered their lives as a nurse, but had become much more. She was the mother Clara had chosen, the partner he didn't know he needed, the woman who had transformed a cold house into a home full of love. He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring, and asked if Camilla would accept to marry him, not to save businesses or for convenience, but for true love and the desire to build an official family that already existed in their hearts. Camilla had tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of pure joy. She looked at Clara, who clapped enthusiastically without fully understanding what was happening, but feeling the positive energy of the moment. She looked at her mother, who smiled with pride. She looked at Elias, Mrs. Nair, Dr. Mark, all those who had been part of this incredible journey. And then she looked at Owen, at the man who had completely transformed, who had learned to be a real father, who had opened his heart to true love. And she said yes with all the certainty in the world, yes. The garden erupted in applause and celebration. Clara jumped into Camilla's lap, asking to see the shiny ring, and Owen hugged them both, forming that image that had become so familiar and precious to them, the three together. A true family built not by circumstances, but by the conscious choice to love each other unconditionally. The wedding was scheduled for 6 months later, enough time to prepare an intimate but meaningful ceremony. Camilla insisted that Clara be the flower girl, and that the ceremony include a special moment where the three would exchange promises, not just the couple but the entire family. Mrs. Helen helped Camilla choose a simple but elegant dress in champagne tone that made her look like a princess but without ostentation. Clara would have a matching dress, and Owen would wear a discreet but well-cut suit. The ceremony would be in the mansion's garden itself, decorated with wildflowers and simple arrangements that reflected the authenticity of that love. The night before the wedding, Camilla visited Anna Lucy's grave for the last time as a single woman. She brought a bouquet of white lilies and spent a few minutes in silence mentally conversing with the woman she never met, but who had been fundamental in her story. Camilla told Anna Lucy that she would care for Clara as if she were her own biological daughter, that she would honor her memory by teaching Clara about the brave mother who brought her into the world, and that she would do everything in her power to ensure the girl grew up happy, healthy, and loved. She thanked Anna Lucy for giving life to Clara, and promised that together she and Owen would give the girl everything she deserved and more. The wedding day dawned perfect, with a clear blue sky and mild temperatures. Guests arrived gradually, only the closest and dearest people. There was no pomp or ostentation, just genuine love and sincere celebration. When Camilla descended the garden stairs arm in arm with her mother, Clara ran ahead, scattering rose petals on the path and laughing with pure joy. Owen awaited her under an arch decorated with wildflowers, his eyes shining with emotion as he watched her approach. The ceremony was conducted by a celebrant who knew the family's entire story and spoke sincerely about the extraordinary journey that had led them there. He spoke of courage, redemption, true love, and how the best families are those we choose to build with consciousness and dedication. Camilla and Owen exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises of love, partnership, respect, and mutual growth. And then, in a special moment not found in traditional ceremonies, the three of them, Camilla, Owen, and Clara, made a collective promise. They promised to be a united family, to support each other at all times, to celebrate joys together, and to face difficulties with courage and love. Clara, even at just 5 years old, understood the importance of that moment. She held Camilla's and Owen's hands and said in her sweet and firm little voice that she loved them both forever and always. There wasn't a dry eye among the guests. When the celebrant finally declared Camilla and Owen husband and wife, and they kissed, sealing their union, Clara clapped enthusiastically, shouting, "My mommy Cammy and my daddy." Those words, so simple yet so profound, perfectly summed up what everyone was feeling. The party that followed was joyful and relaxed. There was live music, a delicious dinner prepared by the cook who now smiled openly, dancing, and many stories shared about the journey that had led them there. Dr. Mark made an emotional toast about courage and justice. Mrs. Helen cried with joy at seeing her daughter so happy. Elias and Mrs. Nair, who had become almost like grandparents to Clara, watched the scene with deep satisfaction. As night fell and the stars began to appear in the Ashtonbury sky, Camilla and Owen danced their first dance as husband and wife, with Clara between them, the three moving together to the sound of a soft song that spoke of new beginnings and eternity. Camilla looked around at all the people she loved, at the house that was now officially her home, at the child who was her heart's daughter and now also legally, at the man who was her husband and life partner. And she thought about how life was mysterious and surprising, how sometimes we arrive at the most unexpected places through the most winding paths. She had entered that mansion years ago, just looking for a job. She left now as a wife, a mother, a fulfilled woman who had found her purpose. And as she danced, under the stars with her new family, Camilla whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for all the choices that had led her there, for the difficulties that had strengthened her, and for the love that had completely transformed her life. Clara fell asleep in Owen's arms as the party continued softly. He carried her to her room, and Camilla accompanied them. Together they placed the girl in the crib that was now a princess bed, covered her with her favorite blanket, and stayed a few minutes just watching her sleep. It was the perfect image of peace, fulfillment, and true love. And when they left the room, Camilla and Owen embraced in the corridor, knowing that they had overcome all storms, that they had built something real and lasting, and that from then on they would face everything life brought together, with courage, love, and unwavering faith in each other and in their family.